Me and you got on the mobile revolution before anyone else did. I feel like you were super early in those days. So I feel like we capitalized on that. And honestly, that was part of the success of my company, part of the success of your first company. But yeah, I've been really happy like running, I have a new startup. I don't talk about it too much, but it's building as we work on it. But yeah, I guess
That
like
makes sense. We're, both a little bit crazy and I like working. I'm sure you do too. It's always nice to have a project to work on.
oh yeah, it's a lot of fun. I feel like I don't know, it makes me excited about life working on like a hard problem, right? Like that's what life's about, right?
Startup building is very hard. It's hard in a way that is very fulfilling. It's complicated. It's nothing like chess or bridge, which I play both of. The people part makes it really dynamic and interesting and fun. I get to work with Christina again. Christina was at PlanGrid at some point.
That's awesome. That's awesome. But how did like reversing a little bit and just like rewinding because we wanted to talk about I guess your life story. Like how did you get to this point in your life where you're so successful, running your second or, how many companies you've run successfully? Like you kind of broke the mold of like standard, I'd call it like standard society really early
Mhm.
on where you were like, I'm going to start a company, build this thing. Like, how does one get to that point in like for you? And like, what was your life journey?
I am happy to share that. So, my parents were refugees of the Vietnam War. The best decision of my life was not made by me, it was made by my parents. Communist Vietnam sort of took over after the war and they saw the aftermath. And as however old they were, 21, 22, they just said, I'm out of here. They had a baby at the time. They had a 1 year old, my sister, and it just wasn't the future they wanted to bring up their daughter in. And they left on a boat, destination nowhere, got picked up by the Malaysian Coast Guards, was in a refugee camp, then got sponsored by a Lutheran priest out in San Bruno. I think at the time, Americans felt very guilty about the Vietnam War, and the religious community really stepped up at the time. And then 8 years later, I was born in San Jose, California. And I knew I wanted to be a builder. I didn't have the best grades. I didn't go to Stanford. I went to state school. I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to build buildings. And that's what I did. I studied construction engineering management. I helped build two hospitals out in Vacaville in San Leandro. Problem with paper on a construction site is obvious to everyone. It was just, we lucked out. It was a miracle that two construction engineers were friends with really incredibly talented software developers, my co-founders who you know also. And we convinced everyone to quit their jobs and apply for Y Combinator. And we ended up running the company for almost 10 years. And I was a reluctant CEO. At the time, my co-founders were more educated than me. They were sort of the archetype of what I thought of a Silicon Valley founder would look like. Many of them were white males. And they asked me to be CEO and to lead the company. And even I didn't think that was the right decision at the time. But since all of them said, this is what we want you to do, that was what I ended up doing, because as founders, you are constantly doing things that you don't want to do. And what else do you want to know? That's sort of how I became a founder.
But like getting to that point, like, did you build a team? Did you like know that that's what you wanted to do? Like, did you save money for the experience? Like people don't just become founders.
Oh, yeah. Let me try to get in the mind state of 2010, 2011. I was a construction engineer hired into a general contracting company as a project engineer. I was probably employee number 1,000. This was 2007.
Yeah.
And over the next 4 years, our team would shrink down to 300 people. So a ton of layoffs. At the time, we were going through a subprime mortgage crisis, a housing crisis, and we were seeing the worst unemployment rates in the construction industry. And so, yeah, it was like this fun project I got to work on with my friends. It's like, why, Steve Jobs announces the first generation iPad. We looked at each other and we're like, man, this looks like a great device to bring out to the field. So we actually tried to do that, except that there was no one was writing construction software for tablets. at the time. And we decided to be the first ones. And so what started off as a fun project, we weren't paying ourselves. We were living in Sunnyvale out of a hacker house, and we were working around the clock. And we were poor, we were broke, but we were having a ton of fun just building together. And then we started showing our friends back in the field, and they started buying it. And we made our first $1 million. Then we make our first $10 million. And it was becoming very evident to us that we could actually build a big business with the product that we had made.
And this is pre YC, or that you kind of flew through a lot?
Yeah. It's like I have 3 kids under 4 now. So like my memory of my own life, it's some days I feel like I have amnesia on my own life. My team will literally tell me stories about, I don't know, me in it. And I have no recollection of it. I think it has to do with sleep deprivation for those of you who are parents. Yes, I flew through like 4 years, I think.
But I guess okay, so you started working on this fun project, and then you decided I'm just going to go like into a hacker house with my 3 friends. Like that, that's not normal. I would say that that's very abnormal, and sometimes it's abnormal, but like, you know, getting in those situations that make success. Like,
I think the other thing I should mention is we were probably all, I mean, not only were the 2 construction engineers a bit jaded to sort of like be front lines of this terrible like crises in housing and construction. Our co-founder and best friend was also dying. He was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer at 27. We started building the company, a few months afterwards, and it was going to be this fun project we were going to work together on. The early versions of PlanGrid were built out of his apartment in Chicago out of Wicker Park. And then we moved in together in Sunnyvale when we got into YC, and he was dying. We had hospice coming on, we were building PlanGrid and hospice was coming to take care of him. And then he passed. And those were like the early days of PlanGrid. And so I think there was moments where, it's like, are we still going to keep working on this thing? And I know for me, it was like so important for me. I think we were all in shock and we were all just very much suffering from trauma at the time. We just wanted to build this company, that this last project that our best friend was working on, because he was coding to his last days. We wanted to build it in memory of him. And I think that's what really drove us, in the early years.
I know several founders, and there was, someone passed away. One of my best friends passed away at my company when I was building it, and I totally get that, where it's, you feel that they would have loved it and they would have like seen it through, and I think they would have been really proud. And I don't know, that you did it. You built something amazing. But I think that's part of the struggle in a startup is it's never easy, right? Like, people think it's easy and it's like a fun project, but there's a lot of internal things that people don't talk about that actually, if you can get through those, they make success.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that, I don't know, I mean, that's really hard, like what you went through. And
I'm building my second startup now, just as you are. And I think we both know that it doesn't get better than this. It only gets worse from here. And, finding product market fit is very hard. Growing a team and retaining an incredibly talented team that's motivated and dedicated to the mission is very hard. Then there's internal conflict that naturally happens. And then life happens. My story is your story, is so many people's story. Life is just part of the human condition. We will all have loss in our lives.
yeah,
Many, many times over and over again. And, as our team grew on our last company to nearly 500 people, I mean, it was just felt like sad stuff was always happening. Like one of our coworkers' husband doesn't come home because he had died in a car accident, leaving her with 2 very young kids. Stories of children, several children getting very, very sick, where they're just in and out of the hospital. Parents dying suddenly, partners dying suddenly, aunts and uncles having like horrific, tragic deaths. I mean, these were like stories that felt like it was happening every single month to one of our team members. And it's very hard to separate your personal life from your professional life. And I think the best we can do is just try to be there as best we can for our teammates and be as compassionate as we can and like have their back, because that's just part of the journey. is how do we keep our shit together while life is still happening and grow the business and get product out the door.
Right. There has to be, there's a fine balance of like presenting to the outer world what's going on, and then the inner world, like it's customer comes in, you have to put on your like good face, and whatever issues are happening internally, you kind of have to compartmentalize that. I think Greg, I've known Greg also a long time. His startup, like there's been things that happened in the past, for him and for me in my last startup. And it's just, you have to have this really good positive mindset, like out to the world to keep people going. You don't want to crumble, because if you crumble, your team will see that. And then the customers will see that. And then things, I don't know, there's a specific type of person that's like a founder type. And I feel like you have that fortitude. It's a fortitude. It's a strength, I guess. But also, like, I can tell you, like, just from your story that we were talking, I can see why people work with you, because you're compassionate. And there's a lot of companies out there that aren't compassionate. Like people, they're just line items, like budget cut, right? Like what's happening now in the world. And it's hard, like, people overhire, they screw up, but you get some CEOs and some founders who just don't care. The employees know that, right? So maybe that's part of your success in like your last startup. Like people felt that from you, that like warmth.
I thought I'd say hi, by the way. It's
Hey,
nice to meet you, Tracy.
you too.
I was staying quiet because you were sharing your story, and it was very touching. And I could tell you had a history with Daniel. I actually don't know exactly the extent of that, but I actually heard you speak at Stanford at the Entrepreneurial Thought Leaders Seminar, and I believe you also spoke at the Gates building one time, like in computer science building during the like the YC class, startup school. But I was very impressed by your story, and I was kind of curious about just the factors that made you so successful. I know you were on like the cover of like a Fast Company, and you got like Doug Leon on your board and the Autodesk CEO. I was kind of curious about like just to share with the audience what do you think are the most important factors that led to the success you achieved?
Oh man, I feel like I just got really lucky. And of course I worked really hard, and it feels like a miracle. I knew my co-founder, it feels like a miracle. I get to meet talented people and recruit them. I would say that what's unique about me, and I think Daniel, you pointed it out, is I never wanted to play games in business. That's not interesting to me. What's interesting to me is the connections that we make with our customers, with our team. In fact, I'm actually incredibly introverted. And so for me, building a startup and building product to solve problems that I think are, bad problems, bad enough that I'm annoyed by it, that I want to build product to fix it. It's my way of having community, because that's how I think of business. I end up building a lot of really close relationships, and it's impossible to build close relationships for me without being who I am. Good, the bad, and the ugly. I feel that the most fun years I was having business when I finally allowed myself to be human and be myself. I think there was early years where I was just, whether it was imposter syndrome or me feeling, like a new founder, new CEO, new in tech. I was a construction engineer, and feeling like I didn't fit in. I very much tried to do everything I can to fit in. I had this image of what I thought a founder and CEO should look like, and it very much didn't feel like it was me, because I didn't have that self-confidence. And I think the moment I decided to just like be myself, it just got a lot easier. And then I can talk about problems. I can talk about what I was scared about. And then I got to see my team like respond to that. And it's like, yeah, we can help you fix this problem. Like, I think we should maybe look into these things, or maybe we should look into, take these paths forward. And everyone sort of jumped in to help because they understood who I was and, why I wanted certain things to happen. And it came from like a very simple, non-weighted place, if that makes sense. I feel like that, like me just being myself, surprisingly ended up being my superpower, because I don't have a business major. I feel like the entire team, like literally everyone on my team is smarter than me, and I literally could not do their jobs. Yet I get the privilege to lead them. And so, yeah, I think that's my answer. Thanks for asking it.
what were some of the values your parents, you mentioned that they were immigrants from Vietnam.
Oh
What,
gosh, my parents like never stop working. They're retired now and they're actually with watching my kids right now. They just cannot stop. Yeah, mom and dad didn't, they like barely have an elementary education. They built a business in the US for 40 years, a distribution business. And, at certain points in my life, they were working two jobs around 7 days a week. And I just got to see how hard they worked. And I know that growing up, that sucks because I didn't get to see my parents all the time and they never went to any soccer games. But I always knew I wanted to work hard because I wanted to honor how hard they worked for me. And the funny thing is, I got to tell Christina this. Someone asked me if my parents are proud of me. And it's like, classic Chinese culture. I was like, you know what? I don't think my parents have ever told me they were proud of me, but I know they are.
That's awesome.
I can hear you say that, sort of honoring others and building for others, for the community, for your co-founder that passed away, and your parents. It's a strong energy source for you that you can draw upon.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's very much made me who I am. And I just feel, I know how lucky I am. I mean, I totally all the time. I often think about my life growing up in Vietnam, and it's just like, wow, I would not have the life I have today. There's no way I would be able to be a founder or CEO in like a different culture. And I feel incredibly lucky to have this privilege.
I once met Naval Ravikant, and he was talking. I was shocked at it. Like, we were having a conversation, and he told me, you'd be surprised about how being in the right place at the right time creates success. And he's like, I wouldn't be successful if I wasn't in the valley. And I'm like, wow, it's scary because there's so many people that like lose opportunities in different places in the world. And I don't know if you still live here, like in San Jose area or whatnot, but just being here for a little bit like helps. It helps, like, because you had support systems. I had support systems in Silicon Valley, and it really helped a lot, like more than I could have ever imagined. And I'm like, wow, if I was isolated where I started the company in New York, it was isolating. There weren't a lot of like support systems like out there.
Mhm.
You're now in a different situation. You've had an exit to Autodesk, and you've got a great team around you. What are you finding as the most important things for you now? Like, I imagine that you could potentially go live in Vietnam and run your company. But what are the key factors now that you're drawing upon to build your new startup?
Man, I retired from Autodesk March 2020, and my co-founder is one of my co-founders, my husband. So we thought we were going to take a cruise. Luckily, we didn't, because if you remember at the time, people were like dying of COVID stuck on cruises. So we were stuck in West Marin, taking walks day in and day out without a job. And what we did was we dissected what felt like every minute of basically our decade journey at our last company. Everything we did right, everything we did wrong, people we would want to work with, our favorite parts of the product, what we could do better from a technology standpoint, what we could do better from a cultural standpoint. And I think for me now, there's just a strong desire to see if we could build a better company. Can I make, can I actually do this again, knowing the mistakes I've made in the past and just not make them? And what would that look like? And also take everything I knew didn't work and try to find a way to make it work this time around. And so I just want to see this through. And that's where I'm at right now.
The team is like so important to a startup. Like, how do you find the right people that you want to work with? Is it just like a gut thing?
I think past performance is a good indicator, especially at this stage, we're like sub 12 people. And so everyone has to roll up their sleeves and be in the trenches and talk to users and build product, or at least support the people who are doing it. This time around, though, what I've learned is that there's a lot of things we can teach, but there's one thing that is very, very hard to teach. You either have it or you don't. And that's just like a good attitude and just positive vibes. And so everyone, of course, is like incredibly talented, incredibly hardworking, great communicators, but they're just awesome people that are great teammates that will never, ever like blame someone else if things aren't going wrong or like stab them behind the back. Not that that was a lot of that, my old company, but we did have some of that, and I got to see how toxic it was.
How do you find that? Like when I interview people now, I'm like, I can't decipher every piece of it. And I'm like looking for those things. Like, do you have a special like way of detecting that? Or it's just bringing people that you know in that you've worked with in the past? Or is it something else?
We have a long list of people we want to work with again. So everyone that is currently working at TigerEye is someone who's worked at PlanGrid before. And we hand selected this team, and we're very excited about working with them. It's been very fun. But at some point, we will have to go out and network. And it's really hard. It's really helpful when there is someone in HR recruiting that's sort of like first line defense. We had this recruiter who was like, she had a master's in psychology from Stanford. And she also had this like uncanny ability to just see right through people. So she would be filtering all the calls and it's just like, this guy is like, no good. These are the signs that this is not going to work out. And it was just this like incredible ability that I didn't have. And it's helpful to have them sort of being first line defense.
Got it.
But reference checks, if you don't have that person, like if you make enough reference calls, you can sort of paint a good picture of how it's going to be like to work with this person.
Okay. Oh, so you do a lot of reference calls also. You'll like interview references. Or I guess your team would.
We try to, yeah. We try to.
Okay.
Blind references are obviously the important ones. I mean, everyone's going to give you 3 references that are, are going to speak positively about them.
So blind references, like you'd go on LinkedIn and be like, oh, they're connected to this person at their past.
You promise this person that you would like keep this confidential and that you just really need a reference check on this person before you make the decision.
Scaling, like I don't know how fast your last startups like grew, but like, is there a right way to scale? Like just by revenue? People in the past would raise a ton of money and like grow their companies, and it's possible.
Yeah.
Like, do you have a different perspective now that you've been through that? Like, Greg has a very specific mindset in the way he's building his company. I built mine with venture capital.
Yeah, we were so conservative with spend, and I think this is just sort of, it might be unique to female leaders. I think there's research around this. I mean, we net burned something like whatever it was, like we net burned like $45 million in 8 years and generated 85 million in ARR. I mean, it's just like, we were really, really kept a lid on things, really efficient business model, but we weren't the leaders in our space. We had a competitor who raised 5 times as much as us, spent 5 times as much, and was like 3 or 4 times bigger than us. And they were the market leaders. They were the category winners at that time when we got acquired. And so, it's just, I guess, a philosophy of how you want to grow your business. In the end, I had a lot of time to think about this. We didn't have the courage, grow faster and try to out execute our competition. And our competition obviously did have that courage. And then they backed it up with execution. And so my thoughts now on scaling, I unfortunately don't have that problem right now where, we're a pre-product, pre-revenue company. I think my big lesson learned is, the moment we find product market fit, we now have experience. We actually know how to hire salespeople. We know what type of sales leader we want in the building. We know what marketing channels we would want to spend money on, and we could run forward that way. We're also thinking farther out. I think that was also a problem with our last company was we ended up being a point solution in the construction vertical, and we were competing against competition who were selling platforms. So then we were forever in this feature by feature battle that we could never win because we were always behind them. Then we needed to go upstream and sell to the enterprise. And we didn't know the enterprise playbook. We didn't know that you need to build role-based access control. We didn't know that people needed SS and like SOC 2 type 2 and ISO 27002 certification, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, there is certain things that you just have to do, even though it doesn't benefit your end user if you want to sell to the enterprise. And we learned that on the way last time around. Anyways, what I'm getting at is all of that costs money to invest in and to deliver into the market.
You mentioned in March 2020, you did some like deep analysis of what you had learned in your last decade, PlanGrid. I was kind of curious if you might share some of the specifics of what you might do better or what you might not do, so maybe others could learn from your mistakes or strengths.
Yeah, we are really like putting a stake in the ground on our core values. And these are the core values we're hiring by. In fact, I actually have another doc that clarifies our core value. And it's 10 commitments we make to each other before anyone joins. Everyone reads it. This is how we're going to work together. So you're either in or out. And we have fired by someone not following the commitments already. Unfortunately, one of our friends, one of our old colleagues, and I'm really proud of them. I would love to read them to you. May I? Because I'm so into
yes,
commitment.
please.
Okay, let me just pull them up and see where they're at.
That'd be really cool to hear, actually.
Okay, so there's our core values, but this is the commitments doc, and it's literally translating our core values in a way where you just cannot misinterpret the core values. So let's see, it's called How We Work Together at TigerEye. 1, I commit to being wholehearted at work as in my personal life. I will be present and participate fully. 2, I will be humble. I will be a good person to work with. I will not be an arrogant jerk. 3, I will constantly improve. Kaizen. I will approach each day as an opportunity to do a better job admitting to and learning from my mistakes. 4, I will occupy a place of trust. I will trust my teammates from all departments. I will trust that I can speak openly about the hard things. I will listen to my teammates even if they disagree with me. 5, I will do what it takes and work together to get the job done. 6, I will walk it like I talk it. 7, I will not speak negatively or destructively about anyone, especially never behind someone's back. 8, I know that this company is a for-profit business and that I am a shareholder. I will question every cost and not waste money. 9, I will strive for simplicity at TigerEye in every way. 10, I agree to live up to these values. If my teammates fail to live up to any of these roles we've agreed to, I will speak up and I will help them correct. In turn, I will be open to constructive criticism from my colleagues should I fail to live by these values.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
And credit to the rules of engagement from Success Factors. I saw a copy of it ages ago, and it's very much inspired by that doc. I don't think it's actually a thing anymore, but I got to see an old copy of it a few years ago.
Nice. Yeah, there's a lot in there. Like you definitely thought about that a lot. All these different bullet points. I like the one about Kaizen, like continual improvement. I do that every day. I mean, I actually use that word a lot. And I'm like, I have to like continually like work on myself, work on my company, work on my personal life, like all of those things. And it's a process. It's not like there's no end goal per se. It's just continual, life. That's what life is. And I feel like that's what companies are,
Yeah. I also think it's a wonderful way of telling each other like what sucks. We see like a design prototype. It's like, oh, we'll Kaizen this. We'll like the 10th iteration would better. Or we read something that someone's written. It's like, we probably need a couple Kaizen moments in here.
That's the way that it works. I feel like that's the way that software is. Like that's the way that people build things.
Right.
So you kind of get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a process. Like I talk to founders and they're like, it's not perfect. We can't launch. I'm like, well,
you're never going to launch. It's never going to be perfect.
Yeah. You're never going to get anything out if you don't like get feedback from people and like get the confidence to get it out, even though that might have bugs and that there's bugs. It's like, even though you're not happy with every piece of it, I feel like that's that's how companies are slowly built over time. But
yeah,
what bullet point like have you really honed in on lately? Like when hiring all of those 12 people and like them committing, like, I heard a lot. There was other ones that stuck out to me, like don't be arrogant.
Yeah.
It's like were highlighted for me as you were talking through them. Is there anything that like sticks out from them?
I feel like the Migos song is always in my head. I will walk it like I talk it. My kids sing it often, so that one's always in my mind. Maybe just because I'm like the leader CEO, so as a reminder to myself, which I don't need that much reminding. It's just it's the one I like the most, I think.
I know you were a visiting partner at Y Combinator. What kinds of advice would you give to incoming entrepreneurs?
Oh, I think I would try to tell as many PlanGrid stories as possible because I think every business is different. And honestly, I didn't understand half of the businesses that came through. It's like, I don't know anything about fintech. I don't know anything about LATAM. I don't know about delivery services in Nigeria. I just don't know any of that. So, when questions came to me, I would just always try to tell them PlanGrid stories and hope something resonated, or at least they would take a piece of it away. I think that the biggest challenges I did see working with like 160, 170 companies is that oftentimes founders would come to me with how do I do sales? How do I sell my product? How do I get better at sales? And, I'd give them tips. It's like, always know the next steps, never leave a meeting without knowing what's next and what they need to make a decision, the basics. But oftentimes I think the worst problems that I saw would be founders lying to themselves about having product market fit when they did not, and that they couldn't sell or grow their business. And they were so in love with the problem that they had chosen to work on. And in the end, it wasn't actually a problem that affected that many people, or enough of a problem where people were going to ever part money for their thing or their solution. And that's a hard conversation to have with the founder.
What do you say? You don't say anything and they just have to
No. I mean, it was like my job to give them the truth. It would be hard. I think it's very easy to be defensive. I can totally see myself in my early 20s reacting the same way, in a bad customer call with PlanGrid. It's like, I don't need this thing. It's like, you absolutely need this thing, and, getting very upset about it. It is hard. I think when we put so much time and love and energy and effort into a solution and the solution just isn't good, and then having to acknowledge that so that you either pivot or build something better, it's a hard thing to do. An easier thing to do is just like, can't you just help me with sales? If only I knew how to have, I don't know, marketing hacks or sales hacks to grow my business, then I would be in a better place. If only you would teach me that. And so those are probably the worst things I saw with just, founders working on the wrong problems.
I guess being a Y, in YC and seeing all these companies, you do, I think there's a pattern recognition that happens quickly, over time. This is just my assumption. If you do it long enough, you kind of see patterns with founders. Are there any patterns you would say that would be detrimental to the founders? What is something that is completely wrong that people would do other than that, the sales side and the sales is there internal quirks that could destroy a company, or is there a complete market that would be wrong, or is there a wrong thinking, or I don't know, YC kind of has their ideas, but is there something in your head you'd be the red flags would go off? For me, one is I love technical co-founders and having a technical co-founder. I have a technical co-founder for my new company. I'm always if they don't have a technical co-founder and then they're outsourcing engineering, it's a red flag. Yes, the company can be successful, but you need that passion in-house. That's one for me.
Yeah. I've always had co-founders. There's 5 co-founders of PlanGrid. This time around, I have 2 co-founders at TigerEye. But I just think it's really hard to be a solo co-founder. I always think about the Venn diagram of the team's talents and what we're experts at. And it's there's of course overlap, but there's also, we were just if we looked at all our Venn diagrams, there's a lot of coverage. And I think with just one person, it's hard to have that coverage because you just have your one singular circle. So that's always just a bad sign for me. It's I know how hard this journey is, and it's just nice to have support. With that said, as we all know, founders fighting is also a problem. And so making sure that it's someone that you've built stuff together with is really important, or you've got a closer connection with, you guys have been friends for the last 10 years. People who have found each other through, I don't know, these founder dating sites or, programs is always a red flag for me. It's you have no idea what trenches you guys have to fight in together and you just met. Good luck. And yeah, you're right. Someone's got to build it. Someone's got to sell it. Or at least if you don't know how to sell, you just have to be willing to learn how to sell. I was a construction engineer, but I was in charge of sales for a very long time. And that's just the two roles you have to have.
Right. Greg's a solo founder.
I noticed you mentioned that you started identifying some maybe differences in yourself as a female founder, perhaps emphasis on a low burn rate, maybe a slower growth in favor of less risk, but then also this reluctant CEO mindset, and I was even sensing maybe even a bit of kind of lower confidence when you're sort of starting out. I'm kind of curious what sort of as a female founder was key for you for your development. What for example, like mentors, like other female founders or sort of support groups? Does anything come to mind? I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I think that as girls, we're taught that small is better, like wear smaller clothes, let's soften our voices, let's not take up too much space. And there's just deep, systematic, cultural reasons. I think there are so many women who have imposter syndrome, because these types of things that I mentioned are coming at us in all kinds of different directions. I think when I this really came from Carol Bartz. Carol Bartz was our independent board director and a mentor of mine. But Carol, I remember this moment where she's speaking at one of our conferences. We used to throw these women in construction conferences for our customers, also an industry with very, with problems with the gender ratios. And Carol said, "Hey, ladies," a bunch of people were asking her questions, many of which had to do with their confidence issues and just working with so many men. And Carol said, "Ladies, do you want to occupy the world like this?" And she shriveled herself up and, stood there very dramatically as this shriveled up person. And then she had her arms out and she said, "Or do you want to occupy the world like this?" Very confidently standing there in her stance. She sort of had this long pause and she said, "Yeah, that's what I thought. So get your bitch wings out." And I think that was the first time I realized that how we put ourselves forward physically in the world affects how confident we feel. For me, I think as I started to allow myself to be Tracy and to be human and to talk about the hard stuff openly, I also just found myself physically opening up my heart more this way. And that was helpful to me. And it's something that's very strange, I'm sure, to hear and very subtle, but just even facing you guys forward versus, I don't know, whatever old position I would be in, kind of, hugging myself or something, but it's helpful. I just feel better.
Huh, that's super interesting. So you had a good board member, like a mentor who helped you a lot. And it sounds like you really learned a lot from that person. And just, I think, are there other mentors that you had like that, as you went through this journey?
So many founders over the years that, I would have one or two conversations with, including you, Daniel. I mean, we reached out to you. We were both building enterprise software in a time where no one was building enterprise software for the App Store. The most helpful people, just like you, just like people who were 2 or 3 years ahead of us and had seen the challenges that we're about to come up against. Those were the most helpful conversations. And there's probably hundreds, just random conversations with random founders who were willing to give me their time.
So it wasn't a strategic, I need to talk to that person.
No, I had two independent board directors. George, who was one of them. He was in COO of Salesforce and eventually COO of Twilio. So he was an enterprise SaaS expert and just a scaling business expert.
Yeah.
Hardcore operator. So he was super helpful to me. And then Carol Bartz is just Carol Bartz. Carol, I don't know how to describe Carol Bartz. Carol's just Carol. She was a programmer. She was a sales leader. She was a CEO at public companies. Tough as nails, sweet as sugar. I don't know how to describe Carol, but Carol's Carol. Yeah, those two people were my first phone calls. Anytime.
Wow.
So, if I had advice for anyone who's scaling, it's build a really great board, because it's probably not going to be the investors. And there's reasons why there's independent board seats, because they're the ones that are going to help you and advise you. And also have an independent mind. I mean, they're going to vote differently than the investors. They just have different incentives, which is to work with the CEO. They're doing it because I don't know, it's just something for them to do.
So I guess, can you talk about your board? It was you and 2 independents, and then I guess
it was me, my co-founder Ralph, 2 investors, and George and Carol.
Your co-founder Ralph, who I guess he's your husband now. Congratulations, by the way. And then 2 independents. They weren't investor. They were independents. You didn't have a
Yeah, 2 investor board directors and then 2 independent board directors. 2 founders, 2.
Okay, so 2.
Doug Leon, I think.
Yeah, Doug.
Got it. Yeah, for me, I always liked Y Combinator just for the network, and I felt like that was my advisory board.
Mm-hmm.
I'd always go to them and ask like founders, for help, and it always helped. It always helped to reach out to founders. So I totally relate to that.
Yeah.
But I do feel like there's a lot of founders out there that are isolated because they're not in Y Combinator and they're not in those accelerator. They don't have that infrastructure like what Y Combinator offers, and it's way more isolating. I mean, Greg actually has Stanford. I think Stanford actually provides something similar. He came from Stanford. There's a lot happening at Stanford, so it's very, very supportive also.
Yeah, I'm curious. You mentioned the importance of reaching out to entrepreneurs 2 or 3 years sort of more advanced than you, and learning from their mistakes and getting advice there. What have been kind of your dominant means to reach out, or is it like being part of the YC community and you're sort of seeing emails, or is it networking events, or do you just like cold reach out through LinkedIn?
Yeah, this is pre-COVID. This is pre-young kids. I don't know. I just end up at Silicon Valley dinners or happy hours, which I don't go to anymore for so many reasons. And then I would just bump into founders. And it's like, what's your biggest problem right now? It's like, what are you building? It's like, oh, that's cool. And then you'd sort of see, this is another founder building a vertical enterprise SaaS business that's mobile first, trying to disrupt the legacy thing. And it's like, that's what I'm doing, but for this industry, like, can you tell me what your problems are? Like, these are my problems. How'd you solve it? Just like everyone I met, it's like, because we're not unique in any way. We can't be the first ones having this business problem that someone else hasn't had already.
I can see the linkage too in your values of humility. You sort of accept you don't have all the answers, and there's other people out there that have done it before that you can learn from. So I think it's a beautiful connection.
It's too hard of a journey to do alone. I am master at asking for help, I guess.
And you've also got to ask the right questions. Where do you oftentimes get your sources of questions? Is it really your own experience? Like, these are the problems I'm immediately facing now? Or, what's kind of your thought process as you sort of explore with those?
Now the conversations that I have is like, this is the problem I'm solving. This is sort of how I'm thinking about product vision. What do you think? Are we crazy here? Am I wrong here? Because, let's find out now before we spend the next 5 years building this. So those are the conversations. And, as we approach launch, Q2 of next year, the questions are, how do we position this in a way that the market will accept it? And I'm just having that same conversation over and over with whoever will talk to me. So if you guys want to have a one-on-one with me, I'd love to show you what we're building and get your advice and just gut reaction.
I can see, as you're describing, it's really this sort of build, measure, learn cycle where you're getting ideas, generating ideas. It's just almost through conversation, getting that feedback from, in a way, like early users, and then updating your thinking to kind of keep that iterative improvement.
Getting as many data points that I can get. They might not all be right, but they're all data points for me.
I know we're running up at the top of the hour, and you run your startup, so we don't want to take too much more time. This was awesome, Tracy. Do you want to end with any questions, Greg? Anything in particular?
Well, what would be one piece of advice that you might share to our audience that you think would be helpful to them and like in their lives? So a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs.
Find a problem that's worthy of your time. Life is really short. If we have any success at all, we're going to be building this company for at least a decade. And so if we're not in love with the problem that we're solving, it's just going to be a massive waste of time and energy. And it's just not going to end well.
Awesome. Well, with that, Tracy, thank you so much. This was amazing. And thank you for taking the time, honestly, today. It was really eye-opening, really great story. And, we'll publish it and we'll send you a copy. We're going to have our editor edit it.
I actually like listening to myself. So hopefully that was a good interview. Thanks, guys. Thanks for seeing me.
Thank you.